December 21st marks the 45th anniversary of the establishment of China-Australia diplomatic ties. 45 years on, how shall we evaluate the development of ties and look into the future? Nepal's Communist parties have won a majority of seats in elections. Is Nepal inching closer to China? Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. China and Australia established diplomatic ties in 1972. 45 years on, how have these two countries been interacting with each other? Well, the two countries updated their relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2014 and in the following year signed a free trade agreement. Now, in this foreign policy white paper that the Australian government released last month, while arguing that the US will remain crucial to Australia's security, Canberra also emphasized that it must build even deeper links with China, yet doubts remain. Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's recent remarks about Australia standing up to foreign interference was one example of such distrust. So how should we define bilateral relations now and into the future? For more, I spoke to Peter Arkell, Managing Director of Carrington Day, who has been doing business with China for almost 20 years. And I started by asking what China's image is like in the eyes of Australians.
For those of us here on the ground, I think overwhelmingly the view is extremely positive, very bullish about the opportunities and the need for deep engagement. For those that are back home and looking at China, there's still a nervousness or maybe even a fear. Maybe it's China is too big to contemplate, but there is still a lot of room for Australian business that's back in Australia to come to China and to give it a crack. And I'd like to see more Australian. I'd like to see big Australian businesses here in bigger numbers than they are now.
I see. Well, you are in primarily the mining business. Let's take a look at bilateral trade. For instance, the trade volume between the two in 2016 was 150 billion Australian dollars. In that, Australia's exports to China was about 93 billion Australian dollars, mostly in iron ore, coal, gold, liquefied natural gas, plus tourism. While China's exports to Australia was worth 62 billion Australian dollars. By the way, Australia does have a trade surplus, as you can tell. That is not very common among the countries in the world. However, China is Australia's biggest trading partner and also the largest investor. How important do you think Australia is in a business sense for China?
Well, the numbers you just gave it, I think, probably demonstrate how important it is. That Australia does have a complementarity, I think, with the Chinese economy. The things that China needs to drive its growth, this phenomenal growth that's happened over the last couple of decades, needs to have resource security to keep it going, to maintain the standard of living, to develop the urbanisation, to bring the China dream to reality, is going to require Australia's resources even into the future. So I don't see any diminishing in that. So I think China does have a really reasonable not a dependence, but an interest in the Australia relationship. It needs to maintain that good commercial friendly relationship that's developed over the last 45 years.
What about the other way around?
Well, if it hadn't been for China, I don't think many of our big companies, the likes of the big mining companies, I shudder to think how they would be today if China hadn't come along. The price of iron ore today is in the vicinity of $70–80. Back in the early 2000s, it was around about $15 a tonne. So that's a big change, and that change has been brought about by China's entry into that resources market. So it's been a fantastic boon for Australia, and it helped Australia to ride through some of the economic waves that crashed over much of the world over recent years.
There are some speculation, though, saying China is, grabbing natural resources everywhere, wherever you can. Do you see it that way, or do the Australian mining companies see it that way?
Well, I think it's only understandable that China, as I said, there is a need for resource security. China had been very self-dependent. It self-reliant. It had its own resources to drive the economy. But as it's grown, as it has had to shift its economy, the need for going abroad to find resources has been a major factor. Is that going to affect the relationship? I don't think the Australian business community would ever want to see China depart. Turning China off Australian resources and telling them to go somewhere else would be a catastrophe for Australia.
What about the kind of upgraded relationship between the two since 2014? For instance, the two countries signed an agreement to become comprehensive strategic partners, and at the end of 2015 the two countries signed a free trade agreement, also a breakthrough, right, between China and a major Western country. How has that impacted bilateral trade, especially in the mining sector? Yeah,
look, we talked about 1972 before being momentous, and CHAFTA, the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, was also momentous. That was a really significant thing to happen between the two countries as trading partners, and it really has set a precedent for the rest of the world. I had a catch-up with a Canadian friend earlier today who was telling me that he'd like the Canadians to just take the Australian Free Trade Agreement, tear the front page out, replace it with Canada, and they'd be very happy. I think it was landmark and it was very significant, and I think we'll still have to wait for all of the fruits to be born, but it sets the right tone. I think it sends a message to business people in Australia and in China that there should be no barriers. You should just get on with business. This is endorsed by both sides.
Well, I would understand that for the business sides for the business circles on both sides, that is the kind of shared interest. However, when Chinese Premier Li Keqiang visited Australia this March, they were discussing the possibility of upgrading their FTA and also for Australia to be more involved in China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is a flagship initiative by China to build connectivity and infrastructure so that more development can be achieved in different parts of the world. But in the end, Australia declined to join that initiative, at least for now. How do you look at that decision by the Australian government, and whether they made the right or wrong choice in your eyes?
Yeah, I think we've shown in recent years to be late adopters rather than early adopters. It was the same with the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. We weren't first to come on board there. The Belt and Road Initiative, to me, is such a mammoth vision that I don't know whether Australian policymakers and the Australian community are fully engaged with what that vision is just yet. They don't really understand it. It doesn't resonate as much because we're almost like a bit of a cul-de-sac on the Belt and Road. In any case, we're not on the highway. You've got to turn off to get down to Australia. Maybe we'll just have to watch the flow a little bit, and inevitably I think we will become part of it. And the Northern Australia initiative of the Australian government would indicate that it's well placed. That being part of that trade movement will be very important. I think we'll be on board later, if not sooner.
I see. Do you see anything on the part of China maybe could do better in making the Australian public or Australian politicians, policymakers especially, to understand this vision slightly better? Are you saying that something could be done better there?
I think we could always improve what we do, and I think these are not typical days for Australian policymakers when it comes to these sort of decisions. In the past, we've been very accustomed to having our big trading partner and our big defence partner being almost the same person or same country. It was Britain for a long time. They were our big trading partner and our defender. Our defence partner these days is the US, and US allies were our trading partners. And now there's a sort of a split now in the way we have to think about things. We have a absolutely dominant partner in terms of trade with China. And we have an absolutely dominant partner when it comes to defence, and we have to work out that sort of balance.
Exactly. Do you think you have worked out? Do you think the Australians are finding the right path now? Because the latest Australian foreign policy white paper, as published in November, somehow made a conclusion that they need to remain committed to their partnership with the United States, because that is crucial, but it also says it needs to build a strong, comprehensive relationship with China. How do you read that kind of stance?
As a business person, I think if you get the second one right, you don't need to worry about the first one so much. If you've got good commercial relationships with a nation, the need to be concerned about defence and some of those other thorny issues become less important or less front of mind. I think let's concentrate from a businessman's point of view. Let's concentrate on getting a lot of our business relationships sorted, get that trade, working on that trade, helping China to become more engaged in trade into Australia. I'd love to see continuing Chinese investment into Australia. Partnering with Australian companies, helping Australian companies to grow and to go international. Australian companies using China as a platform to go from China then into the world. China is such a great global trading nation. Australia is not so good at that. And having a good relationship in China and using this as a platform then for Australian companies with partnerships with Chinese companies to go abroad, I reckon that would be a pretty neat way to develop the relationship.
Are you finding your vision, your idea more difficult to be turned into reality under the kind of political environment we're seeing, or public opinion we're seeing? Because we have seen this kind of a spat between China and the Australian government, or media at least, calling each other irresponsible, or trading very hard, very strong words.
Yeah, I do find that difficult, and I wish it didn't have to happen the way it does. I think too much is put out in the public square, which is maybe not always directed at one side or the other. In my opinion, some of the rhetoric that's going around at the moment has got little to do with the bilateral relationship and more to do with political point scoring that's taking place in Australia, and clobbering somebody over the head with a big stick that resonates with the general public and the media, and it gives something. And there are a couple of by-elections that are taking place, and I think it's part of that political, I use the word dialogue in the most gentle way. It can get a bit rough and tumble at times, and China can be a handy stick to bring out, and I regret it. I don't think it is helpful at all. I think that we should keep our own fights inside and not, venture into some of this other stuff.
Thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Peter Arkell, former chairman of the AustCham Shanghai.
Yeah, thank you.
Nepal's Communist parties have won a majority of seats in parliamentary elections and are expected to form the next government. The Communist Alliance is composed of the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist Leninists, otherwise known as CGTN, and the Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoist Center, otherwise known as CPN Maoist Center. Now, many Nepalese are hoping these parties will usher in a much-needed period of stability in the country, which has cycled through 10 prime ministers since 2006. Nepal's geographic location between India and China also has many people wondering which neighbor the country would side with politically or economically. What has been the driving force behind the rise of the Communist parties in Nepal? And given the alliance's warming ties with China, will these election results present more hurdles to Nepal's relationship with India? And is Nepal inching closer to China? So many questions, and now let's find out the answers. Joining me for the discussion in the Beijing studio are Ravish Bhatia, an Yenching scholar at Peking University, and Budi Prasad Sharma from Nepal, a researcher on the Belt and Road Initiative and China-South Asia relations. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Mr. Sharma, explain this to me. What is behind the rise of these communist parties in Nepal?
You know, we have the long history of the Communist Party since the 1950s. Communist Party also fought against the Rana regimes, who were autocratic and with the help of the British imperialism in India. They have a rule for around 103 years. And when we see the present phenomena also, while the Communist Party were in the government, they have success to deliver some positiveness on the issue of the people's expectation of the stability, development issue. That is why these are the causes for the in Nepal. Actually, Communist Party are getting day by day a very stronger fields.
Is it also because of the present party's inability to bring economic growth, bring stability?
Definitely. The long-ruling party, Nepali Congress, is actually failed to deliver according to the expectation of the people. When we look back the history, first time in Nepal democracy established in 1950. But within 10 years, due to the political confrontation and tussles, the political party failed to provide stability. And the monarchy took power in 1961, and it ruled for 30 years. Again, the political party, Democratic Party and Communist Party, again they fought for re-establishment of democracy, and they succeeded in 1991. Even after that, due to the political confrontation, political instability continued, and Nepal faced the around 10 years civil war, very bloody civil war, which took around 20,000 lives and billions of property damaged, actually. And in these conditions, you know, the peace process happened in 2006. Even though after that also, due to the political confrontation and the lack of the consensus between the major political parties, instability continued, and the first Constitutional Assembly, it failed to deliver the Constitution. And second time, the second Constitutional Assembly, it delivered the constitutions. Even the political instability continued, and this election actually, which happened in the December 7, that definitely success to implement the constitutional provisions, like the Nepal entered in the federal state. Before, Nepal was a unitary state, and Nepal abolished the monarchy, and actually this is the implementation of the constitution, which issues in 2015 September 20.
Ravish, how is this election and the results seen from an Indian perspective?
Incredibly positive, at least for the growth of the democracy in Nepal. In a multi-party electoral system based on multiple election cycles, the rise of one political party in one of these cycles as a shift, or label it as a shift in the major political ideology of the country. What has happened, at least in my view in Nepal right now, is that both the UML and the other party, the Maoist Center party, have run an incredibly efficient campaign, which one should not disregard. One should not disregard the political acumen that was shown by its leaders, especially by Mr. Oli, and the calculations that they made and how they ran their campaigns. And in that way, the opposition, the Nepalese Congress, and even the Madhes did not do enough. They were not sufficiently manipulative enough politically. They did not have the enough acumen or organizational acumen to tap on the right nerves of the people.
So you're saying basically the reason why the Communist Alliance won in these elections is because they did a successful campaign.
Much of it.
Much of it. Well, they're following a Western-style democracy as well. I mean, one of the fallacies of this Western-style democracy is, regardless of whether you're able to deliver or whether you have a very good track record, if you run a very successful campaign, you can come to power. And nobody can say anything about that.
Well, no. The fact is that they have come to power now, and they have been in power as prime ministers before as well. What is important for us to focus right now is to ensure political stability in Nepal, because that's important not just for India and but also for China.
Of course. Mr. Sharma, do you think stability will be maintained and even enhanced? If you look back for the past 10 years, we have every year a different prime minister. That is not good for a country, for the continuation of policy, generally speaking.
The left alliance very impressively succeeds to appease the people's expectation of the stability, economic growth and prosperity. That is why the more vote actually goes for the stability and the developments. And the KPOL, it has very good record in the past also, and we maintained a very good relationship with China also. While he came in China in the 2015 March, he signed the 10 very majestic agreement on, related with the what is called the transit treaty.
Right. You mentioned this good relationship that Mr. Oli, who is expected to be the next prime minister, is Nepal leaning towards China in the future? How do you look at the future direction of the country's foreign policy?
You know, actually Nepal always follow the independent foreign policies. We have two neighbors, one is India and another is China. And Nepal could not go in against China or in India. Even the KPOL, the day before yesterday, he said that we actually clarify the foreign policy in our manifesto also, and our foreign policy also written and clarified in our constitution also. So Nepal always follow the independent foreign policy, and our foreign policy definitely based on our national interest. And this time Nepal needs development, and we need the investment and the support, external support for our development also. That is why I think the new government, according to the Oli, it will take the support from India and China and even other countries to harness the economic growth and developments.
Right. What is the Indian government reaction at this moment towards the development in Nepal? Is India somewhat worried that there is a communist government in power in Nepal?
I would be lying if I say that there's not an apprehension in the government. But the Indian government, or at least both the Indian diplomats and diplomacy in general, have worked very well with each of these partners, including with Mr. KP Oli, who at some point of time criticized India for some of its actions, especially after the earthquake. But while talking about stability, going back to one of the points that Buddhi mentioned, I think going forward it's going to be a little bit challenging, if I can say that, because in order to ensure a political system that is stable, the parties need to have to take into confidence the other opposition parties, including the NC, because they don't have the 2/3 majority right now, and the PR quota is still to be done, the second phase of this election process. And within the alliance as well, there are significant points of differences. So in terms of what is needed from the Indian government, or what the Indian government expects right now, is stability, which I think everybody wants at this particular moment.
Right. Well, for Nepal, I think the government has shown interest in China's Belt and Road Initiative, and this initiative is, if well handled, is expected to deliver the kind of growth and economic development that Nepal is much needed. On this particular issue, very briefly, if you can, Mr. Sharma, how would Nepal tread the line?
Yeah, Nepal signed the MOU on the Belt and Road Initiatives. You know, Belt and Road Initiative is international initiatives, definitely led by the China, but for the rest of the world. So Nepalese people and Nepalese government, it has a lot of expectation on entering the Belt and Road Initiative. Even as a landlocked country, Nepal want to be the link-up country with the rest of the world. And I think the Belt and Road Initiative is majestic, you know, block for Nepal to enter into the world and to wipe out this kind of obstacle being as a landlocked country. Nepalese people have also a lot of expectation with building the comprehensive relationship through the Belt and Road Initiative. And Nepal is also founding member of the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank also. That is why now for the political instability, also the development is the important things, because while initiating the economic reform in China in 1978, the leader Deng Xiaoping, he said that the development is a very hard task, definitely.
Right. Without development, there will not be long-term stability.
Definitely. This is our experience also for
right.
And vice versa.
And vice versa. Absolutely. We have to leave it there, though. Mr. Budi Prasad Sharma from Nepal and Ravish Bhatia from India. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And here is my last point. Nepal is in a very special position geographically, nestled between two of the world's most dynamic economies that also so happen to be major geopolitical rivals. This presents both opportunities and challenges for Nepal's development and stability. It won't be easy to strike a balance between its relations with China and India, but as a small country, it is China's hope that Nepal will find a way to develop friendly but independent relations with both countries. And as bigger neighbors, both China and India need to restrain themselves in exerting economic and political influence over Nepal for our own interests. Such behavior does not align with our status as a major country. It can only leave a negative legacy in the hearts of future generations. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Follow me on Facebook or Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.